logic isn't everything when it comes to a spiritual search. Logic isn't everything when it comes to a spiritual awakening, when it comes to spiritual advancement. And this is something that I've been really thinking about because I think it's really important. It's a really important skill to be able to use gut instinct, to be able to use intuition, especially in this realm, because logic isn't going to be enough to get you out of here. Logic and facts and logic and science is not going to be enough to get you out of here. It's not going to be enough to help you to see through the tricks that this realm tries to play on you. And the reason for this is because a lot of the people who is if you only use logic, right? If you don't use gut instinct, if you don't use intuition, if you don't use your sense of good and evil, your sense of justice, if you don't use these things, then you're going to come to the atheist, the Reddit atheist Rick and Morty conclusion, which is that, oh, everything's made of chemicals and we're on a pale blue dot floating through space, right? Like that's going to be your conclusion of what the nature of reality is. And it's a very surface level view of reality. It's a very surface level view of reality because what's happening with the physical sciences, and what's happening with especially people who, like, all they do is they trust only what they can see in their physical senses. Like they don't trust any of their non-physical senses. They only trust what they can see in the physical, right? Like it's all about what you can see. It's all about what you can touch. It's all about what you can see through a microscope and what you can distill through a chemical compound. That's not going to get you very far, and it's going to keep you in the realm of the seen, right? And what's very interesting about this is that humans can barely see anything anyway. Like we can barely see less than 1% of the light spectrum, let alone all of the other astral dimensions and all of the other spiritual dimensions anyway, right? So this whole idea that it's only about what we can see and it's only about what we can prove on a physical level, that's a very surface level view of reality, because your entire perception of what reality is lies in the seen, right? That there's no study or inquiry into the unseen, right? And so I guess like a good place to start with this is to look at your sense of good and evil, because good and evil is something that it's not something that you can put into a chemical compound. It's not a math equation. It's not something that you can define in words in a peer-reviewed meta study, right? But it's something that you can definitely sense. And I do think that good and evil is a form of energy that we can directly sense, right? Because anytime an injustice happens, it's like you know it when you see it. You don't have to logically figure out whether or not something is good or evil. You just know it when you see it. You know injustice, wrongdoing whenever you see it, and you get that stinging feeling. You get that that feeling of righteous anger that wells up inside you. And anytime you see something good happen, anytime you see justice being served, anytime you see a good Samaritan doing something, you get that sort of warm fuzzy feeling inside you. You get that sense of relief, right? So that is a good place to start. Is to start with your sense of good and evil, and to sort of see, okay, where does that come from, and to tap more into that sense of that sort of inner compass. But like the main thing that I wanted to talk about in this video was gut instinct, right? Because I think that gut instinct and intuition is a really important thing. And it's something that, like, the more time passes, the more I use my intuition, the more I use my gut instinct, the more I use my intuitive faculties. I don't rely so much on book smarts. I think that book smarts, if you get wrapped up in this sort of in the sort of Gnostic mentality, like a lot of the mentality of the Gnostic people, a lot of the mentality of the and whenever I say Gnostic, I mean I know Gnosticism talks about the demiurge, they talk about the Lush farm, they talk about the archons, right? But I'm talking about like people who are obsessed with knowledge, like gnosis, right? Like knowledge, right? Gnosticism, it's about knowledge. It's about what you like. If you read enough books, then you'll attain spiritual enlightenment. If you read the right math equation, or it reminds me of the like the anti-life equation in the DC universe. Like if you get the right math equation, you'll become God or whatever. Right? That there is that type of mentality, that type of that focus on only book smarts. That only book smarts matter. That if you and it's a very systems thing, because I used to have that sort of nerd mentality whenever I was into computer science stuff in high school, where I was all about overcomplicated the simple. I was all about like, oh, like the more complicated something is, like the more intelligent it is, right? Like I used to have that mentality where, I would value complexity. I would value, complicated systems and complicated ways of doing things, right? But now I think that, I have that sort of Terry Davis mentality where, idiots admire complexity and geniuses admire simplicity, right? And so you see this level of, book smart complexity. You see this in occultism. You see this in, like the Kabbalah stuff, or with that gay ass tree diagram. You see it with like especially in the New Age. You see this with astrology, numerology, tarot, right? Like reading the birth charts and all this other stuff, right? Like you see that a lot of that, which is it's designed to make you feel like you're cosplaying, Harry Potter almost. It's designed to blow smoke up your ass. It's designed to, make you feel like you're progressing even though you're not. And what it's designed to do. And I talk about this in I talked about this a long time ago, but I mention it in passing a lot, which is that these doctrines are designed to essentially dazzle the intellect with complexity, and that's what they're designed to do, right? And so if you're always stuck in the head, if you're always stuck in, head based intellect, it's only logic, it's only reason, and logic and reason isn't bad. Okay, intellect isn't bad. Okay, you should have, some use of reason, some use of logic. Okay, but it's not everything, right? If you ignore gut instinct, if you ignore the subtle impulses of your consciousness, then you're going to become a golem, right? It is a very not it is a very golem Hylic sort of worldview. This idea that everything's predetermined and everything's a math equation and everything's, all atoms and bits, and your consciousness is only electrical impulses in the brain, right? That is a very a very Hylic golem way of viewing the world, because what happens, right, is that you view yourself as a golem, right? Because this is the way that like a lot of like the Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson people, like the Carl Sagan people, they view themselves as just golems. Like, oh, we're just in meat suits, right? Like we're just, electrical impulses in meat suits, and that's all we are. We're just on a, a meaningless blue dot floating through space. That is a very golem Hylic kind of a worldview where it's almost like you turn yourself into a Hylic by seeing yourself as a Hylic. You turn yourself into a golem by seeing yourself as a golem, right? But you can even apply this sort of like book smarts, sort of like this obsession with it's only about logic and it's only about reason and it's only about the intellect, and ignoring instincts, ignoring the subtle energies, right? You can apply that to spirituality as well, and you can drive yourself insane just getting into all these overcomplicated systems like Kabbalah, like the astrology, the tarot, the birth charts, the numerology, right? Like all of that stuff, I think it's designed to draw people in with the intellect. But I think like a much simpler approach to I guess spiritual advancement or whatever. And I've experienced this a lot whenever it comes to gut feeling, is to use your reflexes that you have. I think that that's one of the best ways that I have to describe what gut instinct is that it's about like the reflexes that your consciousness has, because a lot of your gut is way faster than your brain. Your gut reacts, and that's why they call it gut instinct. It's an instinct, it's a reflex, and I've called it in the past. I've called it reflex consciousness. It's about the reflexes that your consciousness has, and a lot of times what happens, and I've experienced this many times, where you'll get a first impression, right? Pay attention to your first impressions, okay? Because the first impressions that you have about things are your gut. That's your gut speaking. Like the first impressions, if you look at the word first impression, the impression, like something is being impressed onto your energy field, right? The first impression that you get, it's like the purest, most undiluted form of energy that you get. But a lot of times what happens, and this is where the problem is that your intellect will sort of filter out your gut instinct. It'll filter it out by saying, oh, you can't say that. That's not, acceptable to say out loud. You can't say the quiet part out loud. That's one flavor that it happens. But another way that it happens is that the intellect will try to rationalize. It'll use, rationale. It'll use, like a rationality to sort of say like, oh, but like the gut instinct is invalid because there's no physical evidence for it. And I've experienced this many times with people where like the person won't be like, they won't be antagonistic toward me, they won't be aggressive toward me in any way, and like they won't show any signs of disliking me, but I can sort of feel on a gut level that, oh, okay, that like within the first 5 minutes of being with them, whether it's, like being at like whether it's like one of my coworkers, or whether it's, just random people in school or whatever. Right? A lot of times, like I'll feel, oh, okay, this person hates my guts, even though like there's no evidence for it, like there's no physical evidence for it. Whether and usually it might be like their body language, their like the way they contort their face, like their facial expressions, like their speech patterns, like the way that they say certain phrases. Like the tone of it is something that I sort of subconsciously pick up on, and I get this sort of feeling, oh, okay, this person hates my guts. Even but then what happens is that the intellect will be like, oh, okay, like don't be judgmental, don't be like that, or like that this person hasn't shown any signs of aggression or hostility towards you or whatever, right? But then later on, that same person that I had a bad feeling about, that I had that gut instinct about, a lot of times that person will, like they'll turn around and like do a 180, like they'll target me, they'll stab me in the back, they'll, do like smear campaigns, they'll spread rumors, like they'll start, being more passive aggressive as time goes on, right? So I think that is, you know, one of the greatest examples of like how to use gut feeling is try to feel out people, because I think people because we are social animals. I think human beings, we are social animals, we are social creatures. I think that human beings are one of the best ways to sort of test gut feeling, is that if you have like you need to pay attention to the first impressions that you have, right? I think that's the biggest way, like the simplest way to use gut feeling is, what is your first impression? What are your first impressions about this thing, about this subject, about this event, about this person, right? And even if you don't act on that first impression, what you do is if you become more aware of your first impressions, because that's what the reflex is, in my experience. Like the reflex that you get from your gut telling you this information, right? Telling you like information that's like non-physical. You're picking up like the vibes of a person when whenever people say the vibes feel off about this person, right? So your gut instinct is interacting with the non-physical level, in order to give you information that your intellect doesn't have access to yet. Yet again, the gut works faster than the brain, and a lot of times, like your gut will be able to feel things out before you get a logical explanation. A lot of times, you'll get the intuition before you get the explanation. And so it really is important to just pay attention to your first impressions, right? And that's really the inner compass that you're using in order to navigate this realm. That is the inner compass that you're using in order to do things, instead of looking to the outside, instead of looking to um, you know social norms, instead of looking to like the physical realm, instead of looking to like, oh, okay, we're like, oh, you want an explanation for reality? We're all just chemicals, and it's all just meaningless, and your brain is full of electrical impulses, and that's all you are. You're just in a meat suit, and we're on a tiny blue ball floating through space. Like that's not reality. Okay, that's not the ultimate reality. Don't turn yourself into a golem by doing that, because like you do turn yourself into an NPC. You do turn yourself into a Hylic soul by doing that, because what you're doing is you're essentially seeing yourself as a golem, and so you act in a way that is in accordance with a golem. And this is where you get into a lot of like the scientists, right? A lot of them have this predeterminism thing, like they think that free will doesn't exist, and that because of the fact that physical systems are predeterministic, right? If you see the human being as just a physical system, then everything's predetermined and there is no free will, right? Like that. A lot of you know scientists, a lot of materialists, they'll say that. But I think it's really important to sort of grow in the direction beyond the intellect, beyond just book smarts, right? Because even the people that get into spirituality, they get stuck in the trap of just being obsessed with book smarts, reading a bunch of books, getting into a bunch of systems, like I said before, like astrology, like kabbalah, like numerology, like reading birth charts and all this other stuff, like buying crystals, or like all the doohickeys and all the gadgets that like the new agers buy, and like all of the overcomplicated vernacular that is used in like the occult stuff, right? A lot of that is designed to dazzle the head-based intellect, but we need to move more into these other faculties where and I think it's another thing too, that you don't need a perfectly logical explanation for everything. I think you need to be okay with the fact that you can't put good and evil into a potion. You can't chemically distill good and evil. You can't define good and evil or the human soul as just a math equation. I think that that is something that you have to let go of. I think that that is one of the things that where that is a phase that I went through whenever I went through that atheist phase where I used to be a Rick and Morty materialist whenever I was like in high school or whatever, but eventually I grew out of that, and one of the ways that I had to grow sort of out of that worldview was being okay with not everything needing a perfectly scientific peer reviewed explanation. You don't need a perfectly logical explanation for everything. And I think that our sense of good and evil, yet again, it's one of the biggest examples of this, where you know because you know what good is whenever you see it, you know what evil is whenever you see it, and you know it just because you know it, and it's not. And you don't need a peer-reviewed study. You don't need it to define it in terms of a math equation, and it's okay not to have that, because not everything is meant to be defined by the physical sciences, because we're not physical beings only. Right? We have a physical body, but we're not physical beings, and we need to tap into our non-physical faculties. And so that sense of good and evil and that gut instinct, that intuition, these are important tools to tap into in order to truly sort of schizomaxx, in order to truly schizomaxx out of the prison planet, in order to get out of this place. I think we need to stop seeing it, like we need to stop seeing things as only physical, because like if you think about it this way, like the logic, the intellect, the head-based intellect is about the seen, right? But the gut instinct is about the unseen. So if we want to reach our sort of our feelers into the unseen, I think that we need to tap it more into our gut instinct, that intuition, which is a reflex. Yet again, it's a reflex consciousness. It's something that it works quicker than your head-based intellect, and a lot of times, like you do have these intellectual filters of like you can't say that part out loud, or like or it's it's not logical, right, to say that, because there's no physical evidence presented to you to validate that gut feeling. But I think that if you remove those filters and you pay attention to your first impressions, right, you like the first impressions that you get, that is a really quick hack in terms of how do you access gut feeling, how do you access intuition, is pay attention to your first impressions. That's the quickest, easiest sort of cheat code to intuition, is what is my first impression about this thing, right? And I've had that first impression thing a lot whenever it comes to people, like a lot of the for example, like a lot of the like the famous people like that I look at and I don't like, and I have a suspicion about them. Or like this happened with like Mr. Beast, for example. I always thought that he was kind of a sociopath, just by looking at him, looking at his physiognomy, looking at the way that he talks, like the way, like his speech patterns or whatever. Like there's no physical evidence, like there's no explicit seen evidence that he's a bad guy, but it's about reading between the lines. It's about looking beyond the obvious. It's about peering into the unseen, right? And that's what gut instinct is about. That's what intuition is about. It's about peering into the unseen. And this same thing happened with like Erica Kirk, or like the wife of Charlie Kirk, right? Because like whenever I saw her, like her whole like her whole thing at like the Charlie Kirk memorial service, like I saw her dabbling her fake tears, and like the look in her eye, like the facial expressions, like even her physiognomy. Like I don't know what it is about physiognomy. I think that there are certain people's faces. Whenever I look at like the politicians, whenever I look at the people that run this world, like the physiognomies of a lot of famous people bother me. Like a lot of famous powerful people have physiognomies that bother me, for sure, because a lot of the people like Jacob Rothschild, like David Rockefeller, a lot of these people, they look like lizards, they look like rats, right? And I think that that's for a reason. I think it's a reflection of what they have inside, right? But Erica Kirk, right? Like whenever she gave that presentation, whenever she was dabbing her fake tears, and I know what it's like when someone choreographs emotion. I've seen what it's like whenever someone choreographs emotion, and I thought that I was crazy for a second, because I'm like, oh, okay, like this woman's faking her tears, like her husband just died or whatever, but she's faking her tears or whatever. And I feel like there's something wicked and off about this woman. I feel like this woman's, there's a sort of negative energy going on. right? And then other people started coming up saying like, oh, something feels off about Eric or Kirk, and I'm like, oh, okay, so my gut instinct was right. Right, and then of course, Erica Kirk started, grifting or whatever. But I use that only as an example of gut feeling, of gut instinct. Right. Yet again, the reflex that I had was repulsion towards that. But like, of course, the Overton window, the you can't say that out loud, the social norms, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable to say. A lot of that sort of blocks the gut instinct. Right. It blocks the intuition because of that intellect, that sort of intellectual filter. And so I think that that is one of the major challenges with using your gut, is to, stop the intellectual filters, to stop the sort of moralistic, you can say this, but you're not allowed to say this, sort of unblocking those filters is a really important skill, and paying attention to your first impressions about things. That's a really important way to sort of use your inner compass, your inner sense of direction, your inner knowing, your intuition, is what is my first impression about this. Pay attention to your first impressions. That's one of the major skills that I've sort of used more and more, is pay attention to your first impressions. Pay attention to reading between the lines. What about this do you feel beyond the obvious? Because it's not about what you think. Because you can say I think this, I think XYZ, right? And there's also like the use of language that's really important here. You can say I think this, like it's like what do you think? Okay, but what do you feel about this? Like what's your first impression about this? What do you feel about this? And you're not feeling it in like a sort of emotional reactionary kind of a way, but you're feeling it from a gut kind of a way. Like you're sort of feeling it out, and you're not intellectualizing it. You're not trying to give a rational explanation for it. And yet again, like not everything needs a rational, logical, explicit, math equation explanation for it. Right. So if you say, oh, okay, I don't need, a rational explanation for it. Like, but what do I feel about this situation? What do I truly feel is going on here? And you read between the lines. A lot of times you'll get information that is useful to you. And a lot of times if you pay attention to those first impressions that you get in your consciousness, that sort of reflex, that sort of that initial knee-jerk reaction to something, if you pay attention to that stuff, a lot of times you'll be proven right, which has happened a lot with me and people. Like the vibes, like a lot of times, like I'll talk to people for like 5 minutes, and I'll be 80, I'll be like 80% to 90% correct about what kind of person they are, like their disposition, their character, their moral character, whether or not they're a good person. A lot of times my first impression is spot on about most people I meet. So sometimes, sometimes I might be off, but a lot of times, if I pay attention to that gut instinct, I'm usually proven right the more time I spend with that person. So I think that, gut instinct and, intuition is definitely real, and a cheat code for how to use it is to pay attention to your first impressions. And I think that that is something that we need to do. We need to pay attention to intuition, our gut, our instincts more. It's not enough to have book smarts. It's not enough to just use pure logic, pure facts and logic. Science, the physical sciences. It's about what you can see and touch and hear with your physical senses, and you're limiting yourself to that. Like it's not enough. If you really want to navigate this realm, if you really want to get out of this prison planet, it's not enough to be locked in the head, in the intellect. You need to tap into these other faculties, right? But yeah, that's the video.